Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Belgian Football Podcast. My name is Ben Jackson. I'll be your host, and it's the two-man show tonight. It's been Scott and Joris previously, but tonight's going to be me and Scott. Scott's kind of like our holding midfielder, just keeping everything ticking over, keeping everything together. Scott, how you doing this evening?
I'm very well, and I hope everyone is at home too.
Absolutely hope everyone's doing well. It's that time of year when everyone kind of gets a cold or a little bit of, like, I just call it like freshers flu season, where, you're just kind of suffering with that. So it's getting colder. Nights are drawing in, especially over here. It's just getting a bit more miserable in it, but hopefully it means more and more entertaining football to kind of keep us warm throughout these kind of, slightly darker months. In Belgium, quite a lot to talk about this week, Scott, in terms of Pro League, and we're going to try our very best to give the challenger a little bit more time than we usually do, setting those expectations now to see if we can meet them, because if we don't say it, we might not do it. But fingers crossed we can actually do that, because there's just so much to talk about, and especially around one club in particular. Let me just quickly go through the results from match week 10 in the top flight. Westerlo drew 2-2 with Beerschot. Plenty to talk about in that one. Mechelen hammered Leuven 5-0. Kortrijk beat Genk 2-1, surprise result. That's not the reason Joris isn't here. He'd already told us he wasn't going to make it.
We promise.
Deinze, they beat Charleroi 1-0. Anderlecht won the Classico 3-0 against Standard. Antwerp beat Cercle Bruges 3-0. Club Bruges drew 1-1 with Union, and Sint-Truiden drew 1-1 with Ghent. Let's get to that Westerlo-Beerschot game. And Scott, Beerschot were close, weren't they? I mean, I don't think they deserved to win the game. To be honest, I think Westerlo were by far the better team. They had all the chances and everything. But when you score in the 81st minute and you haven't won all season, like, you just have to hold on. And you got to hold on for longer than 3 minutes, don't you? Surely. I felt bad for them. I mean, Shinton had a really decent game in between the posts. I think he kept it closer than it needed to be. And he gave them that platform for Sanusi to then go and get that goal that, in theory, should have been the winner. I thought Al-Hamdi was good, much better than we saw him in the first week. I think he had a much better game in that central area alongside the likes of Sanusi. And I think Sanusi is a great player for him to learn from in that sense. But Mr. Vuskovic got 2 goals. He looks a proper player as well. Looks like very, very decent signing for them. But then Mr. Bolat made a couple of mistakes again as well. And it's just like, we didn't want to have to talk about him again, but it feels like we're going to be talking about him every week. But a point that doesn't really, that neither team will be happy with. And there's a little bit more to say on Beerschot, but I'll let you talk about your kind of thoughts on the game first before we talk about some more off-field issues for them.
Yeah, it's the old game management again, isn't it? You know, it's something that they've just kind of been plaguing Beerschot all season in different ways. They seem to now finally, perhaps, touch wood, have got a grip of this conceding in the opening 20 minutes. They managed to knock that in the head in the Antwerp derby last weekend before conceding twice in the opening 20 of the second. But you know, they got that one ticked off this weekend. And I mean, when you get that close to a victory, the one thing that you're looking for to kind of open your season up a little bit and just, you know, allow yourself to maybe have a day off and you know, a nice 24 hours, then, you know, it's not to be. They couldn't do it. Tom Rayners afterwards said after 8 straight defeats, this felt like a small victory, which says a lot about the psychology of that camp, I think. But Dirk Kuyt went even further afterwards, saying, I'll be honest, I would have taken a point beforehand. So, you know, which is even more bizarre when you consider how close they were really to kind of getting away from Head Coupier with a win, a place that I don't think many people would have expected them to get the points with. We've been really nice about Westerlo for the majority of the season so far, and talking about their outputs and them performing to, you know, a really decent level across most of the team. Most of the outputs were kind of still there, but I think they struggled to break down that low block of Beerschot's a little bit. And he wasn't the first manager, Timmy Simons, in the case of Westerlo. He's not the first manager this weekend decided to have a moan about low blocks and how frustrating they are to play against. they are, no matter who you are, but the reality is you've just got to find a way, whatever that is for you. And, Timmy Simons was saying he felt that was the issue for them, that they couldn't crack the block. They probably had the chances, but couldn't do it. I'm still in two minds about whether it was actually a slightly improved performance in Beershot's part. Was it, or, is it a bit of, a bit of both? Because I think Westerlo did drop a little bit this weekend, not that much, but a little bit. And 5 changes, I think it was, from Cout as well. So he's trying to mix it up and kind of trying to find solutions and inject some creativity, obviously, and some new energy. And yeah, they'll take that kind of all day. It's small glimmers of hope at the moment. There was due to be a board meeting at Beershot, I think, today, and on the agenda at that meeting was a certain Mr. Cout's performance. The meeting was cancelled at quite short notice, I understand. There's quite a few things on the agenda. A new chairman was due to be ratified. Something happened where they couldn't do that. Other agenda items couldn't be met. And I looked at that today and I thought, what is going on inside that club? Basic functional things, just, they're not able to kind of meet at the moment, and nobody seems to want to take responsibility for that. So that in itself, I think, was a microcosm of everything that's going on the pitch.
Absolutely. And kind of 2 points you raised there. Simon's moaning about the low block. I'm like, they're going to play that. Like, they haven't won all season. They're obviously going to sit deep and defend. Like, practice, train for it, like do what you can to kind of like get your teams to set up like that. And that leads me on to my second point. Speaking of training, like Biscott, we don't even have a training ground at the moment. Like the first one they're meant to use is rubbish. Pitch is unplayable, as Cout said. Second one they tried to secure it didn't work out. So now they're just training at the stadium, and then you had this kind of board meeting that never takes place. This sounds like a Sunday League football team where things aren't really working, but it's fine because it's just a bunch of volunteers trying to get things to work, and it just happens. This isn't how a professional football team should be operating. And yeah, I saw a couple of people, Beerschot fans, saying we just need to basically destroy this club and start again. Like it's a mess. And first you're kind of like, that seems a bit drastic, but then you see all this craziness that's going on. You're like, yeah, if it's not functioning as it should be, and it just shows to show they should never have been promoted. It was, Andrew Ireland deserves a lot of credit for that. I don't want to say Cout doesn't deserve any credit because he took over with at least half the season left to continue that on. But you wonder if Ireland's still there, are the team tactically better set up for this league than they are at the moment under Cout? It's hard to say because the team's it isn't good enough, and you need a miracle basically to keep this lot up.
There's so many questions, still remaining to be answered. I mean, Jorge Kaspregi, as we know, who did a really good job as a sporting director, he left in the summer, of course, along with the chairman, who have now both gone together to Leuven, as we know. And the interesting thing about that, I thought, was not only did he do a good job on no money, the owners, who do have deep pockets, but choose not really to invest in the club still, decided to come out publicly and say, no, we're going to back the club, we're going to invest in it, but yet they still lost their sporting director. So clearly there was a disagreement in terms of vision and strategy there that led to him deciding himself, because he made a decision, no, I'm not staying, I'm going elsewhere. And that option to go to Leuven was probably agreed, before this came into the public realm as well. So he was obviously not aligned with, where he felt the owners' energy and time and investment and ideas were, and the replacements for those two really have not had a great summer. Everything's happened so late, and it's just chaos. It's just chaos. But on this game as well, I mean, we kind of wanted to try and talk a wee bit about Sinan Bolat, didn't we? Because I know we've been a bit critical of him in recent weeks, and unfortunately this weekend, as we were chatting, watching the games, I think it was you, Ben, wasn't it, who said, we're going to have to talk about Sinan again. So if he's listening, and if any of the guys at Westerlo are listening, we don't have an agenda. What we're about to discuss here is based purely on some basic stats that anyone can get available with, and our own eyes from watching every week. But long story short, we don't really like what we're seeing at the moment, which you've probably picked up on in recent weeks. A few basic stats, which don't reflect particularly positively on him. It's an incredibly difficult position to assess and analyse the goalkeeping one, probably the most difficult one in the pitch, so it's worth pointing that out. There's a few caveats, obviously, that go with this. He's got a pass accuracy over the season so far, which sometimes is described as unsuccessful distribution, at around 64%, which isn't good enough at this level, I don't think, really. I mean, even if distribution's not your strongest point, that's too low still. His save percentage is round about 67%. That's based on facing apparently 48 shots. Now, he's conceded 15. 5 of those concessions are actually from corners. So he's conceded, a third of those goals from corners, which is quite interesting because we like to joke about him not being able to get up off the ground, which is something you have to do when you're defending corners. And is a problem full stop if you've got to command that area with a defence. But he's also got a really low long ball accuracy rate of around 40% as well. And in terms of conceding, he's conceded more than anybody as well. So some of his basic numbers do not inspire confidence in the people in front of him. And that's not great for a role in which the body language and the demeanour and how you communicate is so much more important, arguably, than any other position on the pitch.
Yeah, and it's just the interesting thing about it as well, isn't it, that like last season we saw Duroc go away from him. He turned to Gillikens instead, and that was an equal disaster. Like, he was not great between the six either. So then they had to go back to Bola, and they just haven't done anything about it. They still got Koen van Langendonk there. Zenzo de Bok, is kind of the youngster in the squad. They're not going to turn to him. Like, Bola is, even then, on paper with those stats, he's the better than the other two goalkeepers there. So it's kind of, I'm still shocked they haven't gone and spent any money on that position. And yeah, that's just something they've got to do in January or next summer. Probably next summer, I don't think, unless you're guaranteed to get someone. I'm trying to think who might be on the market by that point, who's got like the know-how of the league and stuff like that. Maybe even, I don't know, like a Tom Vandenberg from Kortrijk, like he's a semi-decent goalkeeper. Theo de Forney from Charleroi sat on the bench. Like, if you could pick one of those guys up, I think they're not massively, it's not like a huge improvement, but it's definitely an improvement if you get one of those two. And both should be available. Or there's a couple of other guys who are desperate for clubs that might be available. Mr. Bodart, looking at you. To kind of segue back to one of the points you made earlier about Seseskai going from Beerschot to Leuven. Let's go to Leuven, who had a miserable Saturday afternoon in Mechelen. Rika getting sent off within 12 minutes. I mean, if a long ball over the top and you're getting outpaced by Jeffrey Hermans, who, I love Jeffrey Hermans, but he's not quick. But if you're getting outpaced by him and having to drag him down, like, you're going off. You can't really complain about that one. I don't know what he's complaining about. But there's no then excuse to go and get hammered 5-0, is there, once that happens? Like, you've got to be better than that as a side. And you don't want to say it, but you kind of feel like that is maybe Leuven are a little bit soft. Maybe they are a little bit vulnerable when things aren't going their way and they just kind of can capitulate in this manner, especially when they can't score at the other end. They're struggling to score so much with 11. Take away one extra player, they're going to struggle even more. Not to take anything away from Mechelen, they completely took control of that game, and they just, Rob Scoof was fantastic in the midfield area. Nicholas Storm with another 2 assists, goals even from Lau were back. You've got a couple of other guys scoring in Dahl and Bafdil as well. So a great kind of confidence and boosting win for Mechelen, and a complete opposite for Leuven in the sense of, it feels like they maybe could be going somewhere this season because they've got some players in the right places, but then this happens and you're like, no, this can easily happen to this side because they don't seem to deal with these situations that well.
I think the most pleasing thing for Besnik Kazi with that will be the fact that they didn't take their foot off the pedal even when the game was won, and in truth it was won really early in the game. I mean, if you go 2-0 down in the opening 18 minutes, you're obviously going to be struggling for the rest of the game, but you go 2-0 down and you get a red card, then the game's completely turned and you know that it's on its arse for you. It would have been rather extraordinary if Leuven had managed to get anything out of it in the end. So I think Besnik-Hazy will be delighted that they showed no mercy, to be honest, and got on with the job and were really professional, and didn't let that affect how the rest of the game actually panned out for them. I think from a Leuven perspective, Birger Verstraete said it was a horror afternoon. That's how he described it. But they've had a few of them, it feels like, recently, and that's no wins in 5 for them now. And a lot of the sort of positive stuff over the first month or so, the first 4 to 6 weeks, seems to kind of evaporated. And a bit like Joris has alluded to in the last few weeks, I'm starting to get a little bit more concerned about Leuven now. There's been a bit of a drop-off there, and I don't know what's going on. We were kind of quietly optimistic about the fact that they seem to have addressed the kind of offensive issues that plagued them for all of last season and had brought in players who we felt, okay, they're going to give them a chance in games, they're going to have a foothold and actually create some opportunities. You know, the difference between, you know, a draw becoming a win or a game that, you know, you were never going to win, maybe you do because, you know, you create those opportunities. So there's something going on there that I can't quite put my finger on, really, that I think should be worrying Oscar Garcia. I mean, we mentioned Michael Byron last weekend, a useful player at this level who doesn't seem happy for whatever reason. Again, we highlighted that last weekend. It's just odd that when things aren't going against you, because the thing is, Garcia now does have options. That's the thing. You know, options he hasn't had before, so he can mix it up a little bit, and he's not really doing that and not finding solutions to the problems that they kind of face. So they'll just be hoping to, they'll be glad the international break's be coming. Let's put it like that.
Yeah, 100%. It's quite funny because we've been telling him to play a striker and he plays equal Messi and he scores an own goal and has to go off, doesn't he? So it's just like, he could have been like, oh look, I tried it. But yeah, no, Byron doesn't even get on the pitch. I mean, understandable, I guess, when you... Well, I don't. Maybe it's not understandable when you're that far down. Why don't you just get the guy on, maybe he score a goal, get some confidence. But yeah, I feel like Garcia is under a lot more pressure than probably people are talking about, just because they have forgiven him. This squad isn't the worst squad. He has got the strikers now. It's kind of like, I think there might be a disconnect there between who they brought in and who he's willing to play. And at that point, who's going to win out? Like the sporting director will usually win that battle of, I need you to play these players because I think this is the right way. And the manager, when the manager says no, like, yeah, it invariably ends with the manager leaving, someone coming in and using those players. So yeah, I think he's in trouble. He wasn't convincing last season either, so he did really need this to go well. One man we put a little bit of, well, I don't think we put any pressure on him personally. I don't think he cares what we think. It was Ference Anderson. And we've also, I spoke about Nacho Ferry and I said I didn't know if he was going to be good enough for this level. And the answers with the brace, which is exactly what they needed. The second header was fantastic, actually. It's a really, really good header. The first one's like scrappy, lucky kind of finish, but you'll take those all day long. Who would have guessed that Kortrijk would be the side that finished off Genk's winning streak? I mean, Joris probably would have predicted it. I feel like that's something Joris probably would have seen coming, but it's just a huge, huge win for Kortrijk, isn't it, Scott? And just, is it like a reminder that, yes, this is what Alex Anderson can get them going, and if the players just start to believe a little bit more and get some confidence back, what we expected them to do this season is still possible?
Yeah, well, I thought this was a hell of a result. I don't think anybody saw this one coming. I mean, anyone who went into a bookie shop, not that we're into that here in Belgium, and decided to put good money on Kortrijk getting the points, if that person would like to stand up, I'm sure somebody somewhere, some mad person did that. But, you know, you mentioned Joris having a bit of insight in this. Joris's reaction to this was not frustration at his side losing so much. It was more acknowledgement that Kortrijk are not so much a bogey team, but have punctured Genk's good runs on a number of occasions. And I went and I checked this today because I know Joris would have brought this information along with him, but he's not here, so I'm going to do it, which will please him. We'll get a thumbs up. back in 2022, some of you may remember that Kortrijk actually ended a 10-match winning run that Genk were on at the time. So they do have history here at being the side that tends to pop a really good run. Obviously, this weekend, Genk were going for an 8th straight win, which would have been only the 3rd time they've done that in their history. That's been ended, obviously. It stops at 7. Nacho Ferry, of course, had a great weekend. I mean, you went, don't know how this is going to go. And, he's got 3 goals now, 2 goals in 3 minutes in this game, coming from behind, obviously, but it was his birthday as well. So I don't know whether that's just, free gifts, that's it for the season, whatever it is, but yeah, he had a great day, and I think Freyr Alexanderson was quite interesting afterwards. The club released some video footage of his post-match team talk, which he did on the partially on the pitch, in which he talked how proud he was that they'd responded to obviously a really poor performance and result the previous weekend against Union in Brussels. And I think it just kind of underlines what I keep, that quote he mentioned about, just players performing to kind of a basic competent level is the minimum that's required. And in a way, they kind of achieved that this weekend. I think from a Genk perspective, they had the chances to win it. The game was obviously disrupted. There was that brief stoppage with flares. Thankfully, the game did finish. The intention wasn't to kind of abandon the game. We've seen all that already, But yeah, I mean, Brian Ainham was saying that we just didn't quite have the efficiency to break the block. Someone else wanting to moan about kind of low blocks. Genk are a side who really shouldn't be moaning about low blocks because they have all the tools there to unlock sides that do play a low block. So yeah, yet again, that's the first mention, maybe the second mention of efficiency this week. See if you can find an episode where we don't mention it and there's a prize in that perhaps. Fink was even more interesting actually. He said afterwards, look, we have to find a solution to low blocks against us. As if, as you were just saying in relation to another game, Ben, sides aren't going to play a low block against a side that has plenty of attacking options. So it seems odd. People are talking as if sides are not going to set up to play differently against them, particularly when they're a side like, Kortrijk or Beerschot who are in trouble. What else are they going to do? So it's a bit odd. Last weekend, Genk had an issue with a lack of energy. I thought they just looked a bit lethargic. This weekend, that wasn't quite the case, but they weren't able to kind of, pick the lock. So, yeah, over to you, Torsten. What do you do about that?
Yeah, it's just like, that's what you're going to come up against if you're the stronger team going against a weaker team. It's always been the case, parking the bus, low block, same sort of thing. And the stats are quite hilarious, aren't they, in this game? Like, Kortrijk 25% of the ball, and they completed 160 passes and Genk completed 635 passes. So you had 635 different passes to break that low block. And they had 20 shots, Genk did. So they really should have been able to get something more out of this. A nice smash and grab for Kortrijk at home. But at the end of the day, it's how many you score that matters in football. And another side that more than happy to kind of semi-repeat that, I guess we could say, were Deinze. They at least had 30% of the ball in their game against Charleroi. Kone's been given the own goal from, the Hens free kick, but then Charleroi had 21 shots, 9 of these on targets, and I think Deinze will be very, very grateful to Michael Verrips in goal, 9 saves. I mean, that's just huge. Those are sort of performances from your goalkeeper when you're newly promoted that win you points like this and then can keep you in the league. And fair play to Deinze, they've now put 2 decent results together with that win, the draw, against Anderlecht last time out, and then this win over Charleroi. Steady things a little bit, go into the second international break with a little bit of momentum, very important for them. For Charleroi, just pure frustration. You can see Rick DeMille was frustrated that they didn't get anything out of this game when they really should have. But again, an efficient team does that. And Charleroi, we know they're not an efficient team. They're a good team. They're great to watch, but they're not efficient. And that's their downfall.
Well, there's a bit of a theme developing this week already inadvertently, and it's another manager who wants to have a low block moan. Rick DeMille had a little bit to say on their the inability recently to kind of deal with that, the blocks particularly well. So yeah, deja vu there. And that's kind of the story of this game, actually. Charleroi just couldn't really cope with that block. Deinze take the early lead, and the incentive then is for, just put the block in place and see if they can deal with it. And ultimately, they couldn't. You were saying Verrips was very good, as you were saying, and actually has been all season. Obviously, he got that injury which led to him missing a game. But yeah, I think he does make a difference. And again, it's a bit back to the Sinan Bolat point. He does inspire confidence. The communication's there, and there's a sense that they trust them. It's a psychological thing with goalkeepers, a lot of it, and a body language thing, and he has that positive effect on them. Charleroi are now without an away win in 2 months. They've only won once in 5 away so far this season, so that's becoming a bit of an issue for them, including in games where they probably should be picking things up in. I mean, this is one of those fixtures definitely where it would be earmarked for points, preferably 3. But yeah, they should be getting points out of games like this if you're a side like Charleroi. Vincent Everard, quietly very pleased, really. As you were saying, 4 points from the last 2. So that potential free fall effect that they were looking to hopefully avoid after that great start, the ship has been steadied, and the performances have been pretty decent, really. He wanted to highlight that after the game, Vincent Everard. He said, if we can just improve slightly in our transitions, then we might be able to kill games earlier, not necessarily have to rely on blocks to kind of see the game out. But, if it works for them, it works for them. And certainly at home a lot, it seems to have worked quite well for them. Then they've got a kind of reasonably favourable run of fixtures coming up. They've got Cercle away, Mechelen at home, and Westerlo away next. So they'll be looking forward to those 3, because they're 3 kind of pretty competitive games that they can get their teeth into and maybe get some more points from. Charleroi have got the big Walloon derby from their perspective. They go to Schlesien to play Standard next, who can't really buy a goal at the moment. So Charleroi will be, looking forward to that, despite the fact, as I was saying, that their away record is very poor. So that's an away got 0-0 written all over it already. They then play Leuven at home and Cercle away. So Charleroi will be hoping to kind of, get the bandwagon rolling in the right direction again pretty soon.
If they've got ambitions of top 6, then yeah, I think they need to win all 3 of those, or at least, not lose any of those and pick up a couple of wins. And yeah, it's interesting that Everard. I'm quite happy for him, to be fair. I feel like he was dealt poorly by Molenbeek. I feel like the way they got rid of him before that season even started was just ridiculous, and they paid the price for that. He can now turn around to them and say, look, this is what I can do at this level. Like, if you give me even less than that, this, I'd say on paper, this side isn't as good as that Molenbeek team. But at the end of the day, he's getting them playing in the right way. He understands the league, he understands what needs to be done clearly, and they're doing that. And yeah, if they want to sit back and they hit on the counter, because that's what they've got in Simba going forward and some of the other guys. So fair play to them. It's working. I wouldn't expect them to have played any other way this season. So yeah, kudos to him, definitely. Been impressed with how well he's kind of taken that team and moulded it into his own, given all the kind of things. And I'm sure sort of Hurricane fans will love to hear that after he could not get them promoted last season, which was an interesting one, because I feel like he should have done, and they'd have probably been more competitive than Beerschot. But you mentioned Standard can't score. That happened again against Anderlecht in the Classico. A couple of talking, like they had chances in this game, didn't they? Like, you just look at kind of the numbers, and they had 18 shots, and just again, they probably are the least efficient of all the sides, aren't they? Outside of like Beerschot and those sort of teams. Whereas I'd love to see what the XG was for that Dolberg goal, because it can't have been that high. It can't have been more than 10% or whatever it is. I don't know how they measure it, but it can't have been very high. But the touch to cut inside and then the finish is just sublime. And it's a reminder of the clear talent that he does have. and he has shown in the past in his career, but he's just not consistent. He hasn't been consistent for many years now, but that was a lovely finish. Vasharen looked kind of almost back to his sort of like playmaking best, just kind of drifting around doing his thing, which is important to see. You just want to stay injury free. Stoikens as well. So the signs coming out of that David Huber, they're more than likely going to go for him. Very skeptical if that's a good idea. Like he's in a very kind of favourable position now where there's absolutely no pressure on him and he can just do what he likes. But when you need someone, like when things get tough and difficult, that's where the slightly more experienced managers, or the managers that wanted to be a manager in the first place, like he didn't really want the job. From what we heard, he was happy to take it because he's like willing to do the job for the club. But I'm skeptical. I just don't think it's a good idea, to be honest. Like we've seen another couple of clubs that have done that, and it hasn't really worked. Whereas I guess you could compare it to some other teams like Circle where they promoted from within, but they always knew Miron was going to be the head coach. David Huber was never touted to be kind of the head coach at this point in his career. So I don't know what you think, Scott, but while he's doing a decent job now, and obviously they beat Real Sociedad in a week, despite that horrendous fan trouble that we saw, that was just ridiculous behaviour from the fans in that game with throwing the chairs. But they get that win in that game. They then win the Clasico. Like you're more than likely going to be given the job, but I don't know. I just don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I mean, it's a difficult one, this, because there has to be an assessment done really about who's on the list, who's on Fredberg's list. How do they feel about those candidates they've spoken to? Do they know what they actually want as well behind that? Because that determines obviously everything, who they're looking at, who they're talking to, and why, how those conversations are going. Mark Van Bommel turned them down very quickly, which I think in truth he was always going to, because Anderlecht simply cannot afford him. He was on a massive contract in Belgian terms anyway at Antwerp, and that's one of the reasons why he left Antwerp, because they weren't able to continue paying him effectively the wages that he was on. So yeah, downsizing it was there in salary terms anyway, for poor Jonas de Rock, who we'll get to shortly. But yeah, I mean, I think it's such an interesting one, this, because I think the easy option is to just give it to Uber until the end of the season and go, let's just see where we are. But there has to be a kind of longer term view than that. And psychologically, it's an entirely different thing being in his position, knowing that this is a temporary thing. Essentially, there's no kind of pressure on it because I'm probably not going to be here. The moment you're offered that on a permanent basis, it becomes an entirely different job. And I think sometimes it's too easy to read things that aren't actually there, good things, into things that have happened recently since Brian Reimer's left. I mean, has there been a bounce? Okay, maybe in some respects, but in any meaningful way has there been? And I'm not so sure about that. I think a couple of good results in Europe disguises quite a lot. And helps people feel better about themselves, which makes it easier to make that decision, which was always going to be a tough one to make. I think they just need more experience, I think, even if the players are responding to him, and even if that squad is saying to Jesper Fredberg, yeah, look, we quite like him, we quite enjoy working with him, we wouldn't have a problem with that at all. It's just too easy, I think. I think you've got to be much more thorough than that. I don't believe there, and it's no disrespect to David Uber, I just don't believe there isn't a candidate with more experience who's probably quite a good fit for Anderlecht, just out there, you know what I mean? Just take your time. They've said they're gonna, so do that. It's going to be so interesting to see what they do with this, actually, because I think obviously they're waiting for some big hitters to come back from injuries as well a little bit later in the season, and I suspect they're hoping that they can make a really significant difference. Obviously, they're going to have to try and appoint before then. But yeah, the longer they leave it, the greater the uncertainty. And I think some decent results and some upturns in performances are disguising the real issues just a little bit. I wonder what the real internal conversations are about around their output and the offensive issues that we've already highlighted and that everyone else knows about. The positives from Anderlecht, Dreyer's first goal since May, extraordinary, and Dolberg's first domestic goal. He has scored in Europe, of course, but his first domestic goal since August. So I suppose in a way they're huge positives, and they'll be hoping that's the start of a fresh start from a kind of clean slate, because there was kind of plenty of positives in a Classico which was not dull, but just lacking in a little bit of fire. It felt like a kind of regular game to me. It felt lacking of the passion, not just because obviously there was no away fans for reasons that we all know about. As far as Standard are concerned, I think Ivan Leko's perhaps been playing too much Championship Manager. He did say after the game, if you go and look at the numbers in this game, we should have won it. And if that was the case, then, Standard would win a lot more games than they do, and a lot more sides would. So, it was a bit of a wild comment to kind of come out with. He was pretty frustrated watching a lot of this. Interestingly, I thought in the second half, they got themselves into some really good positions with some of the transitions and some of the counters, but the wrong pass at the wrong moment almost every time let them down. And this is that thing about just the lack of quality again. Eckhart Ayenza's there now, Zakiri's there. There are strikers that they hope are going to click in some form at some point. But yeah, you mentioned it in your intro to the game, Ben. It's just, really struggling to score. And again, a bit like Levin, my worry scale with Standard starting to increase now. I just feel that early season positivity, such as it was, those little glimmers of things, again, have sort of evaporated, and you're now questioning whether Eckhart Ayenza and Zakiri are ever going to produce anything, even a third of what you hope they could, albeit it's early days for them to see Standard all right, because they are slowly starting to get sucked into something which, with their output levels at the moment, is going to become a really, really scary proposition for them.
Absolutely. And there's that really interesting interview with Fergal Harkin, wasn't there, Scott, in the week, where he said, I could have left, but I decided to stay. And I have to say, I really respect that. I haven't seen the Standard fan reaction. I presume it's relatively positive, the fact that he didn't jump ship when he easily could have. He more than likely to get another job, but he felt like he owed it to the club to stay and kind of fight to bring players in and do that sort of stuff. And I think they've done well recruitment-wise, considering what they've got to play with. Yes, it's not like that's the thing. This is a very disjointed Classico in that sense. The talent was clearly in the Anderlecht department in this game, and that is another thing why I think the Huber thing's really interesting. And you've kind of nailed it on the head there, Scott. You take out the wins against Sociedad and the win against Ferencváros. They drew 0-0 to Charleroi. They drew 1-1 with Deinze, and then they beat a pretty poor Standard Liège team. They then play Beerschot after the international break. So he could win that, and then you're giving him the job, and then they play Club Brugge. And that's the test. How do you go against a Club Brugge side that may not be playing great, but they're going to be a bigger test than this? And you have to be tactically a little bit more savvy when you're playing a side like Club Brugge. You can't just wing it and hope for kind of the best and just be like, we'll just set up like this. You need to be much more planning and stuff like that. And they might have a new manager by then. Who knows? I hope not, because I feel like, this whole conversation's ridiculous, and we'll get to that. But yeah, I completely agree with you. I just don't know who the name is. I've seen a couple of names. The guy that was at Watford, was it Ilic or Ivic? He was at Watford for 20 games or something. Won 9 of them, but obviously it's not good enough for Watford. So I think Watford's probably a bad judge of team, or the bad judge of a manager is how well they did at Watford, because you could lose one game and get sacked at Watford. They love a turnover of manager. But yeah, I'm unsure whether Huber should be the man, but if it's a cheap option, that's what they want to do. That's what they want to do. But yeah, like you said, it switches. You mentioned the man Jonas de Lock. I mean, he's been a great appointment, hasn't he? We were quietly, I think, collectively, thinking that he'd do a good job there within the realms of kind of what we expected the club to be this season. And this is kind of what I expected them to be: beat the teams that they should beat, and maybe slightly struggle against the better teams. And that's what they've done, and that's fair enough. Do you know what I mean? And they've put a really nice run together. They obviously hammered Beerschot. They scored goals. Again, I want to praise Vincent Janssen. I think he has moulded into this kind of... They've put... what De Rock's done really well is he's put those players around Janssen that gets the best out of Janssen's kind of willingness to move the ball on. Like Janssen doesn't want to dribble the ball. That's not his game. He doesn't want to do that. He wants to get the ball, pass it on, get in the box, and that's what he does with this side. And he's got Cherry around him. He's willing to run for him on Dredge, Kirk. Like he's got these players. Even Kirk's goal was ridiculous. It was one of the worst goals I've ever seen in terms of defending from circle. But yeah, they looked really good in that sense. Janssen with another 2 assists, Cherry with another goal. I mean, the man's incredible. I love him. He's just such a fun player to watch. Circle, it's frustrating, isn't it, Scott? Because obviously they have that incredibly good result in Europe. Like 6-2 against St. Gallen, did not see that come in at all. I think that's just, literally like hats off to Circle for doing that, because we've wanted a Belgian team to really show that the Belgian league is actually a pretty decent standard. But in Europe, we just seem to always struggle against these teams that we were like, on paper, they should be able to beat them. Whereas Circle were like, oh no, it doesn't matter. We're just going to absolutely trounce this lot. Kevin Denke did well. Minder did well. Like all the boys played well. And then they come into this game and lose 3-0. So it feels like a couple of steps forward, a couple of steps backwards. But I think you have to almost, I don't know, I feel very, and maybe it's our personal bias, I don't know, but I feel like all the talk about, if they keep losing, Milne's got to go. I'm just like, but does he, like, at the end of the day, he's shown that he can build this club and he can get them performing well. It feels like a really, like, your short-term, it'd be massive short-termism kind of being like, we'll just get rid of him because we're kind of languishing down the bottom, rather than putting in the factors of European football and stuff like that. So I think the 6-2 result is great. I think it shows that, look, there's still, that team's still there. Then this Antwerp performance is a reminder that if you don't take your chances in games against a side like Antwerp this season, you are going to get punished and you're going to lose the game. So frustrating for them, but for Antwerp, I mean, another fun performance, fun goals as well. They seem to score quite a lot of fun goals, and they're definitely one side that, I'd recommend watching to anyone this season, because Cherry's going to do something incredible.
Well, we started off talking about Jonas de Rock in your intro there, and Jonas is somebody that a lot of clubs were interested in over the summer. He could have gone to, he had 2 or 3 other options as well before choosing Antwerp, which, as you were saying, Ben, we're quietly confident it was quite a good choice for all sorts of reasons, which is proving kind of to be the case. They've actually been playing pretty well for the whole season. There was that little period where they weren't picking up really any points, or the points that they wanted, despite actually playing kind of quite well. And the dam's kind of burst a wee bit in recent weeks, 4 wins and 4 now. And actually, offensively and defensively, they are the informed side. We were talking about, obviously, Genk's fine run of form kind of coming to an end, but Antwerp, you should highlight 12 goals scored over their last 4, and they've only conceded 1, so they're starting to produce some really good form, and probably just the right time for them as well, because there were some kind of low level questions about is this going to kind of click. It's all very well to kind of play quite well, but there's not that much happening, and it seems to kind of started to happen for them. It's Vincent Janssen is worth another shout, because I questioned, I think way back at the start of the season, I think we all did, is he kind of done? We felt, maybe it was the Mark van Bommel departure factor, because obviously he was brought to the club under Mark van Bommel, and a big part of what he did tactically at the club as well. So I wasn't sure whether it was just that change impacting negatively, but he seems to have kind of found his groove again, and seems to be enjoying his football again, and is producing not only for Antwerp, but making life difficult for lots of defenders who are really struggling to cope with him at the moment. For Circle, it's back to the same questions we've been asking for a while. Interestingly, Miron was talking a little bit about all the things you would expect. Never want to shirk an answer is Big Miron. One of the delights about his press conferences and just dealing with him and talking to him, he wanted to highlight the young age of the squad, and the fact that there's been a lot of change again. He spoke about this 2 weeks ago, but I think he's right, and it's worth mentioning. I don't think he was too disheartened with that result. He did say, look, it was mistakes that killed us again, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about, really. The second goal in particular, is a classic case of players getting caught slightly out of position, and then once they're out of position, they overcommit, and it just takes you out of the game. You're off the board if you do that. So youthful impetuousness, perhaps, as Miron's getting at, and I think he has a very strong sense that if we give these new players that have come in just time to get to know how we want them to play and to adapt to the system, which they're having to tweak, because I think a lot of sides are now starting to figure out how to play against Circle. We've hinted at that a little bit as well. I think the classic Circle press that's worked so well for them and was spectacular last season and getting them the reward in European football and that playoff one place. I think, as successful sides and systems do, they get found out a little bit, and sides are now starting to work out how to combat that. So I think Circle are not only having to get players to get used to that, which is their DNA, their footballing profile, but also consider how do we mix that up a little bit as well, because they certainly have. When we noticed this when we saw them a while ago now in Kilmarnock, that there was a lot of football played in the deck in a way that they don't normally do. So they've been mixing it up a little bit, which I think they're going to have to do, and it's quite interesting that. But Miron was saying, look, I'm confident we can get out of this. And I think, Remberg Romant, the sporting director there, who I'll never forget, he said to me after the Kilmarnock game, he said, look, we're taking a long-term view in this. I think they knew there would be challenges, some of them big coming into the season. And I think now they're looking at it going, okay, longer term, if we can survive now, which is a bizarre turn of fortune really in a way, then it's probably been a good season considering we're in Europe as well. But I think there's a sense he will be given that time, because there's some indications in recent weeks that they can start to get some results. So it's just about getting some degree of consistency going, because it has been inconsistent, but when it's been working for them, it's been looking like they're ready to turn a corner. They've had injuries as well, to be fair to them, I think, that they didn't last season too. So that thrown into this whole kind of cauldron is not ideal. But I think changing the coach would be a very bad idea for lots of reasons. He works for them in so many levels, and I feel quite strongly they have to stick with it and keep working at it.
Yeah, I don't know who else they'd bring in that's going to drastically improve that situation. And obviously they lost Darland, they lost Silva Lopez as well. So there's some key players that have gone. A big game against Deinze next for them after the international break. They do need to kind of win that one. Whereas, I think if I remember rightly, Antwerp have quite a nice couple of fixtures run up to before they play Genk. So they've got Leuven away, Standard Liège at home, and then Deinze, but that game might not go ahead, which we'll get to later on. But they've got a nice little run coming in. Let's go to two other teams that played European football. Club, they beat Sturm Graz 1-0, but that could have been about 4 or 5. They dominated that game for about 80 minutes. And then it was really nervous for the last 10 minutes. And I was just like, this is going to be a classic Belgian team in Europe situation where they're winning and are the best team for 80 minutes and they concede. But thankfully, the Solis goal, which is Fortuna Dusseldorf Solis, that was a lovely, lovely goal from him. That was the winning goal in that one. Union drew 0-0 at home to Bodo Glimt. Not the worst result. I felt going into that game, Bodo Glimt would have been the favourites anyway. I think just in terms of their form and the squad they've got on paper is one of the better teams in Europe in this competition, to be fair. So it's just annoying because it's 0-0 and they don't score goals. But Mr. Franjo Ivanovic, that could be a cheeky little goal of the season contender for that first touch, the little flick round and then finish, and then Mekela's header was fantastic, to be fair. Really nice header from him to make it 1-1. Goalkeepers actually played quite well in this one. The kind of experienced head, Maurice, well, I say played quite. He made a couple of decent saves he doesn't normally make. He did almost concede a couple with some stupidity, but Mignolet, on the other hand, he did actually, especially in the second half when I was watching, he kept club in the game. Not necessarily because they were under the cosh or anything, but just when they attacked and they were pushing quite high and then they got caught in the counter. Obviously, with the kind of a couple of results that they've had, not winning in the league, because obviously they drew this game due to Charleroi, lost to Ghent as well at home. Everyone's like, pressure's back on Nicky Hyen. it's just getting a little bit tedious now, isn't it, Scott? Because it's just like every couple of games, if they go through like a little bad run, the press are like, oh, he's under pressure. No, it's fine. It's like he's under pressure. He's fine. And it's like, which one is it? Like, I don't see why you don't just stick with him. Like, I saw enough, even in that Ghent game, they should have won it. Like, they had enough chances in that against Graz, they should have won it. This it's just the striker situation's a bit strange, obviously, without Nielsen playing Jutgla, who just hasn't looked great, to be honest. And then there's that other situation. Is it like I think he should start Vermaat. I think you'd probably agree with me. We're probably Vermaat fanboys that we want to start. But then the Scott Olsen situation is getting a little bit tense, I guess we could say. Like, he hooked him at half time against Graz, and he was asked why, and he said he just wasn't supporting Says at fullback enough. Like, he wasn't doing what I wanted him to do. Then drops into the bench for this game, plays Skolas instead, and who I like Skolas, but he's nowhere near the level of what Scott Olsen can bring. I think Scott Olsen off the bench wasn't exactly great. So I think that's an interesting situation to keep an eye on, is that if Hayden's gone, look, I can't use this guy because he doesn't work hard enough and stuff like that. It's another knock on Scott Olsen that's been a kind of knock on him in the higher leagues as well. So it's an interesting one to look at. Interested if he'll go to Vermaat. He's got the kind of international rate to sort things out. He'll probably want Nielsen back, and you can see why he's relying on Nielsen. But he's under a little bit of pressure, strangely. Pocagnoli will just be frustrated that they didn't win the game. But again, they're just inconsistent, and that's just going to be the story of Union, I feel like, this season.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the inconsistency there from Union. I think just again, I think they're just struggling to kind of get going. Obviously last weekend they had a really good result, and I said, is this, the start of, some kind of corner being turned? And actually, they were quite good for the majority of this game. The story of it is really more about club, obviously, being kind of the home side, in the sense that Nicky Hyan talking a lot this week about we've reached 10 match days now, which is probably a reasonable number of games to start to begin to see some patterns. We cautioned for weeks about, it being too early to read anything into anything. But I think, if there's one thing we can read into the club now, is that inconsistency, that malaise of being unable to kind of kill games, seems to kind of be back again, and all of the questions that come with that. I mean, 15 points out of a possible 30 for their first 10 games. I mean, to be fair to Nicky Hyan, when talking about that this week, he did say, look, I know that's not good enough. He says, we have to finish games. I agree with you. I think they should stick with him, because I don't think there is an interesting or a viable alternative. I think this has become so much of a regular feature around club now. It feels like it's been a thing in that camp as far as the club goes for probably the last couple of years anyway. I mean, a number of coaches have fallen foul of just having kind of frankly slightly indifferent, bang average domestic form, and then things pick up, at the real business end of the season, and that being enough for them. And they're trying to avoid that, obviously. I mean, if you look at it at the moment, even with only half the points that they could have got, they're only 7 points off top spot, and we know with the points halving, that becomes 3.5. I mean, it's not good enough in terms of consistency and performance levels, but it is in that it kind of keeps them in that mix. There's this weird thing, and that's what makes it so difficult to make a decision with these things. And often, and it's the thing that killed Ronnie Deila in the end, because his European form was actually very good. I remember when he was sacked, I remember saying that I felt he was quite harshly dealt with in a way, because there were some really good numbers and some things going on there, but it was specifically the kind of domestic inconsistency that really made everybody a bit nervous and made them make that change. And the same thing in a way is happening again here, just earlier in the season. And I just wonder, it's just a question I'm throwing out to everybody. I've been wondering for a while, do club struggle a little bit being the side expected to kind of go out and dominate and produce the goods, even at home? They seem to be a side that just don't to me, really feel comfortable with the expectation and the demands of that, which is such an odd thing for a side that have won so much in recent years in Belgium and been in European football regularly. But they just seem to, sometimes struggle with almost that favourites tag, which obviously they have the majority of the time. It's a really odd one. And again, they'll be another side going into this international break, probably quietly quite happy that they can have a little breather and kind of start again without that points gap being too much of an issue.
Yeah, I always feel like if you're club manager, you just need to make sure domestically you're staying in touch with the top, whoever's top of the league and not playing in Europe, basically. Just stay in touch with them, whoever's top or like steaming ahead, stay in touch there, have a decent European outing, get knocked out of Europe and then be like, right, okay, switch gears, we'll go for it in domestic. And that just seems to be the way it's worked, isn't it? And I think you're right, since Clement left, it's been kind of like a little bit of a revolving door. But then you can make arguments for each one why they did leave and stuff like that, and you can kind of understand it. But you don't want that to become a pattern, because then you turn into the side, like I mentioned earlier, like Watford, where you're just chopping and changing every year, no consistency. And if you don't have that, eventually things will kind of fall apart a little bit. So yeah, they definitely could do that break just to kind of settle things down. Media can focus on the Belgian national team for a bit, come back, play against Westerlo, put in a decent performance there, kind of keep things kind of ticking along. We spoke about European football. I was at Stamford Bridge on Thursday for Ghent against Chelsea. And I have to say, when Chelsea took the lead after 12 minutes, I was like, this is going to be a big defeat, which you just can't afford in this competition format this year. I think everyone's kind of realising that goal difference is going to play such a crucial role. And I mean, Chelsea put out their second team, but their second team's worth a hell of a lot more than the Ghent first team, that's for sure. They absolutely loaded for the star players that would, get into most teams. But I think Ghent played really well considering the talent gap. I feel like they grew into the game. I thought Delorg was just fantastic in midfield. I thought he really kind of showed some class. Serdez as well, like he was trying stuff. The biggest disappointment, I say, was Davy Roof. I thought like he'd had such a good domestic season. He just kind of, he crumbled it for a couple of the goals. But 4-2 is a very good result. I think I was saying to my friend who's a Chelsea season ticket holder, he was like, do you think if you'd been offered 2-0 defeat before the game, they'd take it? I was like, yeah, I think 100% they'd be more than happy to take 2-0 away from Stamford Bridge and say, look, we've come out of the best team in the Conference League and we've been able to kind of survive it. But I thought they were even better than that. So fair play to them. Travelling fans, again, it seems that there were some incidences. I didn't actually see it during the game. I thought this looks great. This is very kind of like good to see 3,000 of them. But yeah, it seems that we've got a slight issue there. We'll see kind of what the ramifications are, but it doesn't help with all the beer Scott stuff as well. But they went to St. Truden. Sorry, that was a massive tangent there, but we'll get there in the end. They went to St. Truden and good atmosphere there, actually. And I was very impressed with what I saw from Felice Mazu's side. I really liked it. Really, really liked it. I just loved the kind of energy, and I read a little piece about it today just because I felt like I needed to get some words down on paper about it in terms of how they've... Yeah, he just seems to have got the players that he likes. Do you know what I mean? They just seem to fit the way he wants to play. He's got two strikers, I guess, in Zoe Salam and Bertuccini, who not technically the best footballers, but they're runners, they're workhorses. Like Bertuccini, I was saying to you, Scott, when he scored, it was like, A, it was like he's the first goal he'd ever scored, and B, it was like he'd never scored again. And he just feels like that sort of player that he's just desperate to score. And he had so many chances to score. I was so relieved for him when he finally did. I think he might hit Brahimi at some point if he doesn't pass to him, though, because that man just loves to shoot from miles out. But he gives them that kind of directness, and then you've got Ito kind of playing the ball around. I thought Patrice looks way, way more comfortable in this environment than he did at Anderlecht. He looks much more like the guy we saw at Leuven. They should have won this game, in my opinion. Roof, like he clearly was just saving himself for domestic stuff. 11 saves in this game. I mean, that's just a ridiculous amount of saves. Again, kind of smash and grab their first goal through that man Gandelman. But yeah, really, really impressed with what I saw from St. Truden. And I'm feeling a lot more confident in them going forward after that performance than any of the Latanzio performances. And I think looks like they've sorted themselves out a little bit, and I'd expect them to finish mid-table if they can keep playing like that, because they're really good to watch.
Yeah, well, they're still unbeaten under Felice now, 8 points out of 12 since he came in, and it'd be fair to say he's really got inside everybody's heads there, and he's working some of that man management magic that we know he's got, because we've seen it in abundance in a number of kind of previous roles, particularly Union, obviously, where he was riding that crest of a wave until Anderlecht picked up the phone and it came to a rather bizarre end. I mean, for those of you who don't know as well, actually, Felice is an ex-teacher. And that goes a long way to his ability to kind of motivate people, I think, get inside their heads and just be able to kind of talk them round, get them producing the goods, which I've always found interesting. He when he's spoken in interviews about his pre-football background, you can totally see that segue into kind of his coaching. And all those players obviously are enjoying playing for him as well, because you can, again, back to me in my body language, you can see it. They're producing the results now, and I think they have confidence in what he's telling them and what he's asking them to do. So the communication is obviously very good, and it's been the instant impact, the instant bounce that you look for when you make an appointment. And you just got to wonder maybe why they didn't go and make that appointment actually in the summer. Obviously, somebody picked up the phone and poured some nonsense into Andre Pinto's ear, sporting director at St Truden, to go, I know a guy who knows a guy who's got, who can, all that nonsense. And they bought something when Felix Mazu was always available even then. It's funny the way things work. It's going to be interesting to see where they go now. Ryotaro Ito, excellent game. He's really, really responding. We know that Felice knows how to work with Japanese players. He even mentioned that at his unveiling press conference. He's got a lot of admiration for them for their work rate, so he's tapping into that. You mentioned Davy Roof having a slightly dodgy game at Stamford Bridge. Well, quite the opposite this weekend. He had a really good game domestically, and probably was a massive part in them escaping with a point in the end. You're right about St Truden should have won the game. Mazu did say that as well. He said, look, we deserved to win and we should have won it. So he's a little bit frustrated. And yet again, for the second week running, he wanted to highlight, I think we've got the quality in this squad to see us okay. And I think that's probably right. It just shows you need to know what to do with your raw ingredients. Which ultimately Christian Lattanzio didn't. And of course, Mazu obviously knows the Belgian game very well, which does give you an advantage over someone like Lattanzio, who came in not having any experience of it and not even really knowing it at all, as well, which makes it doubly difficult. Wouter Rankin, very honest, he was talking about the again, having a young squad and coping with, the domestic and European football going, and the players struggling with that a little bit. He was honest with that and admitting that, Stamford Bridge took quite a lot out of them. And he did say post-match, he said, I'm just a wee bit disappointed, he says, because we have to be a little bit smarter when we're tired. He felt they made poor choices in the game that didn't really help them and invited pressure on. So talking about, just a bit of inexperience with the game management there again. But yeah, again, it's ultimately that thing we talk about with them a lot, and just a kind of general inconsistency. You get a couple of quite good performances, one bang average one, and then one that, you just think, what was that all about? And yeah, they're just kind of they're struggling to find their consistency, and it's just nice to see Wouter Rankin being as honest about the fact that they're struggling to adjust to all of those changes in their schedule a lot, and to get the young players who we know the challenge with them, same one Miran Mislic has, is to get that little bit of consistency kind of going. It doesn't matter whether you've had young players at your club for a long time or a lot of new young players have come in. Consistency is always the most difficult thing to get going with young players, because they just have so many more distractions. But you should still have plenty of youngsters in there.
Absolutely, yeah. No, absolutely. That's so true. And they've kind of, where they've got the experiences in the right positions as well, isn't it? It's kind of at the back and stuff. And I feel like, I didn't really mention him, but Bertacini and Zarisalam, there just seem to have two players who've got a point to prove. And I think that plays into Mazu, because he's also got a point to prove. And just doing just quickly check the form sort of table, and over the last 5 games, if that was how the league was, they'd be 5th. So I think that shows how much of an improvement and upturn in form there's been. We promised the listeners an extended sort of deeper dive into the Challenger Pro League. Scott, I'll let you go through the results. There's one club we want to talk about, a couple of games we probably want to talk about as well. So yeah, for you Challenger Pro League fans, it's time to give you a little bit of stuff that you've probably been asking us for a while.
Yeah, I think Challenger Pro League fans might enjoy this. We've reached Matchday 7 in the Challenger Pro League. So what happened this weekend? Well, RFC Liège drew against Lommel with a slightly controversial, spectacular goal in that game, actually, from the halfway line. Patro Eisden beat Deinze 3-1. More on Deinze in a second, because they are the ongoing big story and feel like they're going to be now, probably until the end of the season. Beveren lost 1-0 at home to Lokeren in what had some ugly scenes actually after the game as well. Serang lost 2-1 at home to Eupen. Molenbeek and Raal drew 1 each. Jong Genk beat Anderlecht Futures 1-0. Zulte Waregem beat Club Next 2-1, and Liège, who are on quite a good run of form, beat Frank Baran 4-0. So Molenbeek are still top. Zulte are still second, still in a good run of form, but it's really all about Deinze, who lost this weekend, probably not unsurprisingly, Ben.
Yeah, it's not surprising given. Yeah, we found out that it wasn't the breakfast that had been taken away; it was the lunches, wasn't it? But I mean, the point still stands. They're in massive trouble, and I think you can kind of maybe start comparing this league a little like softly compare it to the Championship, in the sense that some clubs are willing to spend to try and get out of it, but the money can dry up very, very quickly in this league. And I think when we spoke to Alex from Union, Alex Muzio, he was kind of saying that the difference between what you get financially is massive. It's absolutely massive between what you get in the top flight and what you get in the second division. So you kind of do have to, you either live within your means or you pump money in to say that then we'll make up for it kind of when we get promoted, which if anyone's watched the Wrexham documentary, it's kind of similar to that, I guess, is probably the best example, where they're talking about they were willing to spend X amount in the National League because they knew that if they made it into League Two, it would kind of balance itself out. But then they also would always talk about, if we don't make it into League Two, we're in trouble. And Deinze clearly are one of those sides that are in trouble, and the fact that they came out and said that the reports were kind of false, I guess, weren't they, Scott? They were saying that like this has been misrepresented in the media, but then it's like, actually, no, it turns out the media seems to be pretty right on this one, that there is a massive issue. They need investment. And it's strange because on the pitch, the teams could get promoted. Like it's a decent side, but I just feel like this is going to really curtail their kind of any chances of that. If they fail to exist in the kind of long term, but in the short term, it seems like that result of the weekend would suggest to me that this is having an impact on the side.
Yeah, it's not going to go away, this one. And just in case you don't know the detail, for anybody who's listening, Deinze are now in a situation where, because the main majority shareholders, ACA Football Partners, who are a Singapore-based investment company who a few years ago decided they wanted to set up their own multi-club network, which they've done. Incidentally, they've got 3 clubs part of their network. So there's Deinze in the Challenger Pro League in Belgium. There's Charlton in League One in England, who are one of their babies, and Torremolinos in the Secunda in Spain. They're the third club. Deinze were the first club, and of course they ploughed, in Belgian terms anyway, quite a lot of money in there when they came in to try and get things up and running. And the story since they've come in, and they've not been in the club for very long, actually is largely positive in terms of results. There was a sense that they were kind of making progress, but basically what's happened here is ACA have run into financial difficulties as a business in their own right, and just simply need to cut costs now. And part of that is looking effectively to get rid of Deinze. So they've turned the tap off. The rumour mill at the moment is saying that the owners are prepared to sell Deinze for €1. if they can get rid of them. The issue there is, despite them claiming that they're talking to some interested parties at the moment, why would you do that? You've got debts that are around 2 million, which admittedly are nothing, although they are mounting by the day pretty much. There is doubts as to whether players will be paid, doubts around all sorts of things at the moment. The head of the youth academy's already left because he sees the direction of travel here. So Deinze are on a fast forward course to be the 5th club in 5 years that go bankrupt. We've seen Rosselaar go, Lochran have gone, Mouscron have gone, and most recently Ostend, of course. So you've got this bizarre situation where they've now got a temporary transfer ban because, they're failing to comply with ongoing licensing commission regulations. And Deinze are one of the clubs that were on a watch list, which basically means when you submit your budget and licence at the start of the season, unless you provide enough evidence and proof effectively of finances, then they will review it month to month. And Deinze are one of these clubs. Here's the really interesting and bizarre bit, I think. The licensing commission is a very weird thing, and we really should do a separate episode on this at some point. We're going to get somebody from the licensing commission if we can, because it's a fascinating topic. Anyway, when you submit your budgets, guys, what you can do is, if you don't basically submit a proper budget with real proof of income and flow, you can submit a letter of promise, it's called. Now, this is basically where the owners sign a letter effectively saying, we promise we will abide by the monetary figures we're giving you. Now, you can submit that and they go, okay, we'll give you a licence, off you go. The curious thing here is, because of the rules, the licensing committee, as soon as they accept a letter of promise, they can't then come along later and say, you're not complying, we're withdrawing your licence, you're dead, it's game over. They don't effectively have the ultimate punishment. The only thing they can do is put you on that monthly watch list. Now, they've got the transfer ban because they've failed recently with payments. There's another huge deadline looming. The 20th of October is basically when they have to meet deadlines they've already missed, but because of the financial situation, they effectively have to find a new owner by then. Otherwise, there's a big points deduction coming, which isn't going to be good. And, they can't submit any further letters of promise as well. So even if they do get to the end of the season without an owner, they're basically not going to get a licence again. We know that because they can't prove their income without a new owner, which they're on balance almost certainly not going to get. So the scenario is, one, new ownership, which isn't looking likely. I don't think anybody really believes this kind of rumour mill that we're talking to some parties, because who's going to take the debt on and then throw another 3, 4, 5 million at it? You know what I mean? I just don't see it. The other option is direct bankruptcy. Now, the creditors can file for that as well, which takes it out of the club's hands. So Niels van Brantegem, who's the licence manager at the Belgian FA, was talking a little bit about this week, as you would expect, and talking about comfort letters. And he was, I thought, a bit casual about it. He went, look, this isn't just a multi-club ownership, foreign ownership problem. And he wanted to reference the fact that, there have been Belgian clubs under Belgian ownership who've gone down the same route. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, which he's correct about. But he didn't really want to address the issue of, well, how sharp are your teeth? We highlighted all of this recently, didn't we, with Ostend and the changes that need to happen. And this letter of promise thing, Ben, has just got to go. They've got to have the ultimate sanction of being able to go, if you don't meet these terms by this date, it's game over. I think there's a worry. The Licensing Commission don't want to force clubs out of business, but at the same time, in whose interest is it to drag the pain out? Players very soon could be allowed to leave, and there's nobody really in charge of things day to day in the club at the moment as well. The CEO has kind of stepped back as well, so there's nobody all over this who you feel is going to be able to negotiate with the licensing commission on a day to day basis. And even some of the players have come out this week and said they feel that that's it. And as you're saying, it's such a shame because up till now on the pitch, they've had a reasonably bright start to the season, and everybody knows what an exciting coach Hernan Losada is. Jesper Fredberg, if you're watching, he's probably somebody you might at some point soon probably have quite an interesting conversation with, because he plays the sort of football and addresses a lot of the issues that, you know, your side is currently struggling with. So here's somebody who could become available kind of quite soon, who fits the profile. But yeah, an absolute mess. And I think this is on a fast forward course to us losing another club, because I just do not see who would take them on. And in all honesty, they're not an attractive buy, really, are they?
I think that's the most kind of depressing element of this, isn't it? It's kind of the fact that you're looking at it, you're like, well, why would you buy a Belgian second tier team unless you're part of a multi-club thing? But then when you're part of the multi-club thing, the second division Belgian team is not number one, number two, or number three, even number four priority. Most of the time they're just the kind of, we'll use them maybe to bring some players over from other countries, blah blah blah, like funnel stuff through them. Not saying anything like dodgy or illicit, but like you'll funnel stuff through them as a kind of an organisation. You start to lose the identity of the club and stuff like that. And I know that it's something that's quite important and needs to be kind of spoken about more. But that's the only option I feel they have, is to become a part of another multi-club ownership thing. But then you can go down the same route. Like it's not guaranteed. Like, what if City just decided they weren't interested in Lommel? Like, what would happen to Lommel? There's no way they'd be able to survive. Like, they'd obviously lose the entirety of their playing staff. And then it's like, well, what are they? They'd be what they were before, which was a side that was struggling. You look at Solang as well, kind of look how much they're struggling in this league at the moment. It's not a pretty picture, but I think it just shows the wider issue that the game has at the moment, which is it's just so expensive. It just costs far too much money for people to, like, the fact that there very few Belgians could even, like, wealthy Belgians wouldn't be able to even take over a side like Deinze. Like, it's not going to happen, is it? There's no reason why they would. But even if they did, there's no way they can fund this. Like, it's astronomical amounts of money. Like, 2 million is not a small amount of money, is it? That you're asking someone to take on, and then, like you said, you've then got to pump more money in over the long term. Like, it's just an unsustainable issue that the game, it will never deal with, because the problem is you've got the guys at the very, very top. And we're not talking about the top teams in Belgium at this point. We're talking about the top teams in the Premier League. Mainly the Premier League, maybe a couple in La Liga with Barca, Madrid and that and Juventus and all those sort of clubs that kind of want to change things a little bit just to suit themselves even more, because all they care about is making money. Whether it's about making money through matches or from the fans. Like, they'll leech fans for every single penny they've got, releasing like fourth shirts that will be worn once and charging 80 quid for it. Whereas then you've got clubs like Deinze, the clubs we mentioned, Oostend, Mouscron. Like, you look through all the ownership issues these clubs have had, and they just go out of business because it's too expensive for anyone else to kind of save their own club. So I think it'd be nice to kind of plug someone that you've worked closely with. I've had some really nice conversation with, is Rory over at the Football Heritage podcast and website, and while it's not necessarily like a social movement or anything like that, but it's kind of capturing the history of football clubs and kind of football heritage. And I think it's really important that we kind of, as a kind of football fandom, we kind of get back to that idea of what the football club actually is. And obviously this is something that's very close to my heart, because my own club, Reading, at the moment is going through exactly the same thing that these fans are going through, where it's, you don't know if your club's going to exist in the future. And while you're thinking about and doing that, you've got Man United fans complaining because Eric Ten Hag lost this game and they called their club a joke and it's a farce and all that. And it's like, well, your club's still going to exist. Your club's still spending billions and billions of pounds every year on players, matches, shirts, all that sort of stuff. But then it's these other clubs that just, they can't survive within the ecosystem that we've got at the moment. So it's one of the more depressing things about the Challenger, which is one of the more exciting leagues for us to watch, isn't it, Scott? Like, we love watching the kind of the Challenger and the stories that emerge. And it's what the football, you need a tiered system, in my mind, a tiered system where you can, the fluidity. This is why I think the Dutch system's a little bit weird, because you've obviously got that locked in top two divisions and that's it. Whereas in Belgium, we have the fluidity where we can have a team like Raal get promoted and suddenly storm up to fourth in the table and stuff like that. We get Lokeren coming back. Like, you can come back from this if you make your way through the pyramid, but it's just so difficult. And Yeah, it's really depressing what's happening at Deinze, and it's not just because it's happening there. And I know that there were a couple of comments that people were like, "Well, I'm glad we don't have to go there for an away game anymore," which I'm sure, fair enough. There are some away games you don't want to do, but it's just a sad state of affairs when you listed all those clubs. What you think, like Mouscron, Oostend, Deinze, that they're all in within the lifetime of our podcast, which hasn't been going for very long. Those are our locker and not far off that kind of era either. Countless others that could have been listed, like Beveren, obviously were one back in the day as well. Before we do go, I think we could just switch our attention back to kind of on-field stuff. Let's talk a little bit, I guess, about kind of maybe a little bit about Beveren. I find that it's an interesting kind of case study in the sense of they've really pushed hard for promotion 2 years in a row now. It looks like they haven't got it this season, at least. It looks like they're not going to be kind of one of those teams pushing for that. And I feel like, are they like a prime example of once you get relegated from the Pro League, you do need to bounce back up reasonably quickly, because as we just said with the finances and stuff, you start to lose out on that financial kind of competitivity, and suddenly you're just going to become stuck in that Pro League in the second division, and you're going to hope you're going to have a Dender or Beerscott season, because those are completely out of the blue, and it's very, very difficult to get out of this league once you get stuck there looks like they might be.
Yeah, well, you put your finger on the exact issue, and that is you've kind of got two choices. You either pump the money in the hope that, you get to the top division, the Pro League, and access to more money. And in truth, although it's night and day between these two divisions in Belgium, the money increase in the top flight, is eye-wateringly small still in itself. So your choice is you spend to join the top table, or you're effectively kind of making up the numbers and hoping for the best in a way. And I think in the case of Deinze, to bring it back to them for a second, this is a classic case of a company setting up a new multi-club ownership model, essentially not knowing what they're doing and not having good or the right footballing people in place, or even getting particularly good advice from anybody. I don't think either. I mean, they're not wrong in having to have spent money. They had to do that, but they've obviously not spent the money wisely or in the right way, and that network has grown too fast as well. When you take on other clubs that you have to service, then and you get into trouble, the first club to suffer is going to be the smallest club in the network, and that, in this case, financially speaking, that's Deinze, because Torremolinos have a bigger budget than Deinze do, and it's not the first time we've seen this. Oostend fell foul of, in their case, very nefarious owners, with very dubious intent, because Oostend were the smallest club in that PMG network, effectively. So they were always going to be the absolute whipping boys for everybody else in a network that was actually too large. So Deinze are hoping they can keep the operation afloat with the other two clubs if they can cut this one loose effectively. You mentioned Lommel as well. Now, Lommel were bought obviously by City Football Group when they were in dire straits, and actually the debt that Lommel had at the time was around 5 or 6 million. Relatively modest, big in Belgian terms, but modest in general footballing terms. Deinze's is less, but is probably going to be nearer that, over the coming months. So, as you were saying, I think the only option, if there's going to be a successful outcome to this, and on balance there isn't going to be for a whole host of reasons, it will have to be another multi-club ownership model, because they're the only ones who can service the debt. City Football Group are very unusual in that they identified, we want a club in Belgium because we don't have one, and Belgium is excellent, obviously, ground for developing talent and for helping players from very particular parts of the globe come and acclimatise themselves before going to bigger clubs in the network. So strategically for them, buying Lommel actually made sense, a point that was just very, very lucky from Lommel's timing, albeit they're starting again, of course, and have been building a relationship with the fans there again. You just don't see that happening at Deinze, because Lommel Lommel did have some potential, and did have a fan base of a moderate size to kind of play with there. Deinze, again, like I say, partly because of the size of the fan base and those things, the club doesn't really have a history or a culture in the top flight either, unlike Lommel does as well. Lommel are a relative name. If you follow or know anything about Belgian football, you'll know that Lommel have done some things in the game, if you like. So coming back to, another shout out to the wonderful Rory at the Heritage Footy Pod, Deinze do not have much of a footballing heritage or culture within the Belgian football landscape. Lommel do, and I think that helped them ultimately in the end get a sale when they were in dire straits in a way that Deinze cannot use that as an argument. So yeah, stick with this story, folks, because we'll come back to it every time there's an update, and there'll probably be one quite soon, because I was saying that 20th of October deadline, which is the deadline that could become the one that ultimately presents some of their biggest problem, is looming pretty large now.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely get back to this when we get back from the international break, because, plenty would have happened by then. Fingers crossed they'll have got a new owner, but it's, I find it very unlikely. Like you, Scott, I'm quite pessimistic as well. I hope that whetted the appetites of the second-tier fans. We tried to, go a little bit deeper into kind of the stuff coming out of that, because there is plenty to talk about. It's just, trying to balance two kind of leagues that are worthy of their own podcasts in one night when we're working men is not the easiest thing in the world, that's for sure. But hopefully, we did a little bit more justice than we usually do this time. And I think that's probably it for us on this one. Scott, hope you enjoyed the international break, if that's even possible.
I will do my best, and there's a couple of big fixtures coming up for the Red Devils as well, so normally that disengagement might not be the case. I could be very tempted to spend a lot of time in these two fixtures because of decent opposition, and actually, although we don't have time to talk about it here, I'm sure we might come back to it depending on the results after the break, but I thought the squad announcement was really quite positive. Some players in there I'm looking forward to hopefully getting some game time as well. So enjoy the international break, everybody.
Absolutely. While you'll be doing that, I'll probably be watching, if I can, some Africa Cup of Nations qualification. That'll get me through the next couple of weeks, that's for sure. But as always, if you do like this podcast, do rate us on your podcast app of choice, or you can buy us a coffee to donate. You can at buymeacoffee.com, and you can find our details on our social media accounts as well. I think that's probably it for this week's episode. So we will be back after the international break. So a little bit of a hiatus from us. Hopefully yours will be back as well. So enjoy your time away from National League. Enjoy the international break, everyone. And we'll speak to you very soon on another episode of the Belgian Football Podcast.